For 250 years, they financed wars, moved governments, and built an empire that outlasted every political system it operated inside. They never advertised, they rarely spoke. Their name became the world's most recognizable shorthand for hidden power, and most of what people believe about them is wrong. Then, in one extraordinary moment, they sat down on camera and said things no Rothschild had ever said publicly before. Watch until the end, because the most revealing part of this story isn't their wealth. It's the one decision Benjamin de Rothschild made before he died that transferred control of the entire family fortune to someone who was never supposed to be in charge of it. The interview that almost never happened. There are families whose wealth is so old, so vast, and so deliberately obscured that they have become more mythology than fact. And then, once in a generation, they speak. Baron Benjamin de Rothschild did not give interviews, neither did his father, Edmund. Neither did most of the family's senior figures across their more than 2 centuries of financial dominance. The Rothschilds built their empire, in part, by staying out of the light. Discretion was not a personality trait. It was institutional policy. So when Benjamin appeared on camera and began talking not about denying his family's influence, but about transferring control of the entire Rothschild fortune to his wife, Baroness Ariane de Rothschild, the financial world paid attention. The announcement was remarkable on 2 levels. The first was the decision itself. Ariane de Rothschild was not born into the family. She married into it. She came from a background in finance and banking, not from centuries of dynastic grooming. And yet Benjamin made clear that he believed she was not merely capable of running the family's operations, he believed she was the right person to do it. And that her gender was not a complication to be managed, but a qualification to be celebrated. In a family whose entire history had been shaped by strategic marriages designed to keep wealth within the bloodline, handing the reins to an outsider and a woman was a statement that reverberated far beyond the banking sector. The second remarkable thing was simply that he said it publicly at all. Jacob Rothschild, the British patriarch of the family's English branch, also gave rare extended interviews during this period, including one filmed at Waddesdon Manor, the family's extraordinary neo-Renaissance estate in Buckinghamshire, during the centenary of the Balfour Declaration. Jacob sat on camera with a composure that only comes from a lifetime of understanding exactly how much you do not need to explain yourself to anyone. He spoke about philanthropy, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, about history and responsibility, and about a family whose name has been attached to more conspiracy theories, more speculation, and more deliberate distortion than perhaps any other private institution in modern times. Together, these interviews offer something genuinely rare, a window into how the Rothschilds see themselves, what they choose to reveal, and what that careful self-presentation tells us about the machinery of dynasty at its most sophisticated. To understand what they said, however, you first need to understand what they came from. Drop a comment below. Did you know the Rothschilds handed control to an outsider? Most people have no idea this happened. Let's see who's been paying attention. From a Frankfurt ghetto to the world's largest private fortune, the story of the Rothschild family begins not in a palace or a private bank, but in the Judengasse, the Jewish lane of Frankfurt, Germany. In the 18th century, Frankfurt's Jewish population was confined by law to a single, overcrowded street. They could not own land outside it. They could not move freely through the city after dark. They could not hold most professions. The Judengasse was not a community in any romantic sense. It was a cage with an address. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born into that cage in 1744. He lost both parents to smallpox as a teenager and was sent to apprentice at a banking house in Hanover. He returned to Frankfurt, set up a small business dealing in rare coins and antiques, and caught the attention of Wilhelm IX, the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, one of the wealthiest rulers in the German states, and a man who made significant income renting Hessian soldiers to foreign armies, including the British forces fighting American revolutionaries. The relationship between Mayer and Wilhelm was the hinge on which the entire Rothschild empire would swing. Wilhelm trusted Mayer to manage money, first small sums, then significant ones. As that trust deepened, Mayer expanded. He placed his 5 sons in 5 different European capitals: Amschel in Frankfurt, Salomon in Vienna, Nathan in London, Kalman in Naples, James in Paris. Each son established an independent banking house. Together, they formed a network that had no equivalent in the world. What made it uniquely powerful was not simply geographic spread, it was communication. The Rothschilds developed a courier system that moved information across Europe faster than any government could replicate. In an era before the telegraph, before reliable postal services, before any of the infrastructure of modern communication, knowing something first was worth almost incalculable amounts of money. And the Rothschilds almost always knew first. The profits from this network compounded. The family financed both sides of the Napoleonic Wars, not out of political sympathy, but out of financial pragmatism. Governments needed money to fight. The Rothschilds had money to lend. When Napoleon fell at Waterloo in 1815, the chaos that followed in European bond markets created an opportunity that Nathan Rothschild in London exploited with legendary precision. Within years, the family had established themselves as the dominant private financial force in Europe. By the mid-19th century, they were something else entirely. Lionel de Rothschild, Nathan's son, extended a crucial £4 million loan to the British government in 1875, enabling Prime Minister Disraeli to purchase a controlling stake in the Suez Canal before the French could consolidate it. The deal was arranged overnight. The British government had no time to convene Parliament, no mechanism to raise the capital through conventional means. Lionel provided it from personal resources, and the British Empire secured a strategic artery that would define its power for another century. The family also financed railways across Europe and North America, mining operations on multiple continents, and the debt instruments of sovereign nations during periods of war and reconstruction. At their peak in the 19th century, the Rothschilds were estimated to control the largest private fortune in the history of modern finance, a figure that historians still debate, but place in the hundreds of billions in contemporary terms. And through all of it, they maintained one additional financial strategy that was as cold as it was effective: endogamy. For generations, Rothschilds married other Rothschilds. Cousins, on occasion first cousins, united in marriages that kept equity within the bloodline and consolidated rather than dispersed the family's capital base. Jacob Rothschild, asked about this practice in his rare interviews, described it with the particular calm of someone who has long since processed the moral complexity of his own history. It was, he noted, simply what the family did. It worked. And it continued until the pressures of the modern world made it both socially untenable and strategically unnecessary. The Balfour Declaration and the weight of history. Of all the historical moments in which the Rothschild name appears, perhaps none carries more contemporary weight than the Balfour Declaration of 1917. The document, a letter from British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lord Walter Rothschild, a prominent member of the British Jewish community, expressed the British government's support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. It is, depending on your political and historical perspective, either one of the foundational documents of Zionism and the eventual state of Israel, or one of the root causes of a displacement and conflict that has defined the Middle East for more than a century. Jacob Rothschild spoke about the Balfour Declaration with considerable care at Waddesdon Manor. On the occasion of its centenary, he was clear about the family's role in the document's history. They were participants in a larger historical context, not the architects of it. Lord Walter Rothschild was the addressee because he was the most prominent figure in British Jewish public life at the time. The letter was directed to him as a representative of a community, not as a patron whose financial power had commissioned the policy. Jacob also addressed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict directly and with an even-handedness that was notable for someone in his position. He identified himself as a believer who supported peace. He criticized extremism from both sides. He acknowledged that the history the declaration set in motion had produced both the realization of a long-sought homeland and enormous suffering for those displaced in the process. This careful, morally serious engagement with the complexity of the history sits in sharp contrast to the conspiratorial framing that has attached itself to the family's involvement for decades. The Rothschilds did not create Israel. They did not engineer the Balfour Declaration as an act of financial imperialism. They were part of a historical moment involving multiple governments, multiple communities, and forces that extended far beyond any single family's influence. Benjamin de Rothschild's family demonstrated their connection to Israel in a different, more concrete way. Despite documented personal disputes with Israeli authorities over regulatory and business matters, the family contributed $22 million to COVID-19 relief efforts in Israel in 2020. Jacob's philanthropic work through the Rothschild Foundation has similarly focused on cultural preservation, education, and Jewish heritage, not the accumulation of political leverage. The family's relationship with Israel is not simple, not purely transactional, and not reducible to a conspiracy theory about financial control. It is the relationship of a dynasty whose history is entangled with some of the most significant and painful events of the 20th century, and who carry that weight with varying degrees of grace depending on the individual and the moment. Nationalization, collapse, and the art of rebuilding. If there is one chapter of Rothschild history that the conspiracy theories reliably omit, it is this one. The French branch of the family lost almost everything. In 1981, François Mitterrand's newly elected socialist government in France nationalized the banking sector. The Rothschild Bank in Paris, Bank Rothschild, which had operated continuously since James de Rothschild established it in the early 19th century, was seized by the state. David René de Rothschild, who was then leading the French branch, found himself in the position of rebuilding a dynasty from minimal resources. This is not the behavior of a family with hidden levers of global control. You do not get nationalized if you control the government nationalizing you. What happened next, however, does speak to something genuine about the Rothschild character. They rebuilt. David René launched a new private bank, Rothschild & C Bank, operating initially with a skeleton staff and none of the institutional infrastructure of the pre-nationalization operation. Over the following decades, through discipline, network, and the considerable advantage of one of the most recognized brand names in global finance, the French branch re-established itself as a formidable force in European private banking and mergers and acquisitions advisory. This resilience, the capacity not merely to survive institutional destruction, but to reconstruct from it, is perhaps the most underappreciated aspect of the Rothschild story. Dynasties at this level do not persist for 250 years because they are immune to adversity. They persist because they have developed, across generations, a cultural commitment to survival that outlasts any individual crisis. It was into this rebuilt institution that Ariane de Rothschild stepped when she married Benjamin, and it was to her that Benjamin, in that rare, public, quietly extraordinary interview, chose to transfer control. Ariane's background was in banking and finance before she joined the family. She had built her own professional credibility independently. When Benjamin died of a sudden cardiac arrest in January 2021 at the age of 57, the transition of authority to her was not merely a symbolic passing of a torch. It was the activation of a succession plan that Benjamin had made clear and public, and that Ariane had the experience and disposition to execute. Since assuming leadership of the Edmond de Rothschild Group, the family's private banking and asset management operation, Ariane has driven a significant reformulation of the institution's priorities. She has emphasized long-term sustainable investment, green infrastructure, and impact-driven finance. She has reshaped the family's public narrative away from the mythology of hidden global control and toward the reality of a sophisticated private financial institution operating in a competitive global market. She has done this without a Rothschild surname by birth, without having grown up inside the dynasty's internal culture, and without the generational grooming that traditionally precedes leadership succession in families of this kind. By almost any measure, it is one of the more remarkable succession stories in contemporary finance. Here's a question for the comments. If the Rothschilds truly controlled governments the way people claim, why did a government just seize their entire bank and they couldn't stop it? I want to see your answer below. Hannah, Nathaniel, and the next generation's divergence. If the Rothschild story in the 20th century was largely defined by its patriarchs Edmund, Jacob, David René, the 21st century is shaping up to be a far less unified narrative. Hannah Rothschild, Jacob's daughter, gave a candid account in her rare interview of what succession actually looked like from the inside. The family, she revealed, had no advanced knowledge of Jacob's succession plans. There was no formal meeting, No structured handover, no document circulated to the next generation outlining what would happen and who would be responsible for what. When Jacob's intentions became clear after his death, it came as a surprise to those closest to him. This is worth sitting with for a moment. One of the most strategically sophisticated financial dynasties in history, a family that spent 2 centuries planning marriages, business structures, and capital flows with extraordinary deliberateness, did not have a transparent succession conversation with the people who would inherit the responsibility. Whether this reflects a failure of communication, a preference for maintaining control until the very end, or something more personal about Jacob's particular character, it left Hannah and her siblings in the position of defining their own roles, rather than stepping into predefined ones. Hannah's response was characteristically self-directed. She built her career across multiple domains: finance, cultural leadership, and philanthropy. She became the first female chairman of the National Gallery in London. She wrote a biography of her father. She established her own identity as an intellectual and cultural figure as much as a financial one. Carrying forward Jacob's long-held belief articulated explicitly in 1965 that the combination of intellect and wealth was what distinguished the Rothschild legacy from mere accumulation. Her brother, Nathaniel, took a different path, concentrating on finance and on the family's investment activities with a more conventional focus on capital deployment and returns. Her brother David diverged further still into environmental activism and advocacy, a direction that situates him in the emerging landscape of wealth and sustainability rather than the traditional banking operations that built the family name. 3 siblings. 3 entirely different interpretations of what it means to carry one of the most loaded surnames in financial history. This divergence is not accidental. It reflects a broader truth about multi-generational dynasties. The further you get from the founding generation, the harder it becomes to maintain a unified identity. The original Rothschild model worked because 5 brothers ran 5 coordinated banks with a shared strategy and constant communication. By the 5th and 6th generation, the family has spread across continents, disciplines, and value systems. The coordination that made the original empire possible is no longer structurally feasible. What remains is something less quantifiable but perhaps more durable: a shared name, a shared history, and a philosophy about the relationship between intelligence, capital, and responsibility that each generation must reinterpret for themselves. The myths, the realities, and what actually remains. It would be irresponsible to discuss the Rothschild family without addressing directly the extraordinary volume of conspiracy theory that has accumulated around their name, because understanding that mythology and its origins is essential to understanding the family's actual position in the modern world. The conspiracy theories involving the Rothschilds are not a recent internet phenomenon. They have roots in 19th century European anti-Semitism, in state-sponsored propaganda that required a villain capable of explaining away the anxieties of industrializing societies, and in a broader tradition of paranoid political thinking that needs a hidden hand behind every crisis. The claims range from the merely implausible to the grotesque. The family secretly controls all central banks. They engineered both world wars for profit. They control global media, global governments, and global finance through invisible mechanisms that leave no documentary trace. They are responsible for crises, famines, elections, assassinations, and pandemics. None of these claims are supported by credible evidence. None of them hold up to historical scrutiny. All of them share a structural characteristic common to anti-Semitic conspiracy thinking. They attribute to a Jewish family a degree of coordinated, secret, multi-generational power that would require capabilities no human institution has ever possessed. The Rothschilds are a very wealthy and historically influential banking family. They are not a shadow government. The fact that they require this clarification in the 21st century in a serious analytical video speaks to the persistent power of weaponized mythology. There are, however, real controversies that deserve acknowledgement. The family's banking operations have faced regulatory scrutiny in various jurisdictions. Individual members have been associated with transactions and relationships that raised legitimate questions. One family member faced allegations of serious personal misconduct that were reported credibly and deserve to be taken seriously on their own terms. These real controversies are, if anything, more interesting than the mythology, because they reveal an institution navigating the same pressures, legal frameworks, and ethical expectations that govern any large financial operation, and not always perfectly. What actually remains of the Rothschild financial empire today is considerably less monolithic than its 19th century predecessor, but it is by no means negligible. Rothschild & Co., the primary banking entity, operates as a global advisory and asset management firm, with particular strength in mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, and wealth management for ultra-high net worth clients. The Edmund de Rothschild Group, under Ariane's leadership, manages tens of billions in private banking assets, with an increasing focus on sustainable and impact investment. The family also retains ownership of renowned wine estates, including Chateau Mouton Rothschild and Chateau Lafite. Rothschild, two of the most prestigious labels in Bordeaux that serve simultaneously as investment assets, cultural symbols, and, in their way, the most tangible expression of the family's long view of value. You do not invest in vineyards if you are thinking in quarterly cycles. You invest in vineyards if you are thinking in generations. That generational horizon is, ultimately, what the Rothschild story is actually about, not hidden levers of global control, not secret governments or supernatural financial powers, but something more specific, more human, and in its way more impressive, a family that understood, 250 years ago, that the most durable form of wealth is not money, but the capacity to think beyond the current moment, and that has spent every generation since trying, imperfectly and sometimes controversially, to live up to that insight. The interviews reveal a family fully aware of their mythology, comfortable with their history's complexity, and engaged in the difficult work of making a dynasty legible to a world that would rather reduce them to a symbol. They are not a symbol, they are a family. And like every family at every scale, they are figuring it out as they go. Before you scroll, what's the one thing from this video that completely changed how you think about the Rothschilds? Not what you heard before, what you now actually know. Comment it below. The most interesting answers always come from videos like this one. 3 things this story makes undeniable. First, the most durable dynasties are not built on secrecy, they are built on information advantage. The Rothschilds did not become powerful by hiding money. They became powerful by knowing things first, moving faster than governments, and treating intelligence as their most valuable currency. That principle has never stopped working. Second, resilience is the only financial strategy that compounds across centuries. They were nationalized, persecuted, scattered, and they rebuilt every time because the institution was designed to outlast any individual crisis within it. Wealth without that architecture does not survive 3 generations, let alone 10. Third, the most strategic successions are never the most obvious ones. Handing power to the person no one expected is not sentiment, it is precision. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, like and subscribe. Every video goes deeper than the headline.